The spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army, Serhiy Bratchuk, is joining our broadcast. Serhiy, as always, I'm very glad to see you. Thank you for finding the time.
Feeling is mutual. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Defense Forces. Greetings.
Glory to the heroes. Serhiy, let's start with the main topic of the day. The US articulated at the UN Security Council that an agreement or deal, as Trump likes to call it, using his terminology, on a ceasefire in Ukraine should be presented to the UN Security Council by August 8th. Do you have a sense that this story is coming to an end? How do you assess such actions by the United States?
Well, if we're talking about the statement itself, then I have the feeling that the outcome of this statement will be the same as the previous ones. That's probably true. If only absolutely right. In any case, I fully understand that if the administration of the US president were as inclined towards symbolism as they are in the Moscow swamps, then obviously I'd like to remind our viewers who may have forgotten about 080808. I think those who remember this story will clearly recall how during the Olympics the Russian dictator Putin started a war in Georgia and accordingly occupied part of that republic. Obviously, if let's say communications about a complete ceasefire on the line of contact in the Russian-Ukrainian war had taken place before or on August 8th, then one could really talk about a certain tendency of the Trump administration towards symbolism. But this, already starts to smell more like conspiracy theory. We are talking about real things that are happening on the front today, fierce battles, endless terror against peaceful Ukrainian cities, both in the rear and in the frontline zones. And we understand perfectly well that every day, every night, the enemy launches missile and drone strikes on many of our cities. And it's clear that in this list, during wartime, the capital is always in first place by default. Many casualties, unfortunately, at this moment, we are forced to state that these are still preliminary figures. Even today, as we speak, Kramatorsk, there are dead and wounded, once again a residential 5-story building. The night is ahead, and I fully understand that virtually all Ukrainian citizens are anxiously waiting to see what will happen tonight, whether there will be a terrorist strike by the Russian Federation. Yes, I am forced to state that there is indeed a potential threat both from drones and from missiles. So it's clear what is guiding political decisions today. But in the military political sense, only the Trump administration and the high-ranking special representative diplomat who made this statement to the whole world from the United Nations podium probably know why the Trump administration is making such statements. In any case, we are not letting our guard down, that's for sure. We fully understand that the war is ongoing. And judging by the increasing number of terrorist attacks, Putin has no intention of ending the war. It's quite possible indeed that if he is tragically killed before the 8th of the month, then of course the chances of this particular statement becoming a tangible reality will undoubtedly increase a little.
But I have always said that this war will most likely end in Moscow, and most likely with the death of this dictator, possibly in the near future. We'll be watching, as they say, and discussing it with you. A hellish night that Ukraine endured, first and foremost, of course, the capital. Can you explain why Russia is once again hitting a new low? These strikes are becoming increasingly and blatantly terrorist in nature, aren't they? The use of the Iskander-K missile, specifically with a cluster warhead which multiplies the number of casualties deliberately, is simply a demonstration to the whole world that they are targeting residential infrastructure. What is the Russian Federation trying to show with this?
Well, in fact, the answer is obvious. Of course, like most Ukrainian citizens and reasonable, normal people around the world, I'll start by saying that terror cannot be explained. Terror is terror, and all terrorists must be eliminated. As for the strikes on civilians, on peaceful people, first and foremost, it's obvious that in any city, be it Odessa, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kropivnitsky, Chernivtsi, Chernig, well, now all our cities that are periodically subjected to such attacks, it's clear that this is pressure on people, an attempt not only to create an atmosphere of fear, but probably also something close to, I'm not trying to scare anyone right now. I'm trying as much as possible to get into the heads of Russian terrorists and murderers, although it's very difficult for a normal person to do. Nevertheless, I'm not a doctor, I can't make diagnoses, but I understand perfectly well that, to put it mildly, things are not quite right in the heads of these scoundrels. We understand perfectly well that this is an attempt to create an atmosphere of fear, a dead zone, where people, out of fear, will be forced to come themselves and bow to the dictator, kiss his feet and say, that's it, we're ready to surrender. That's probably what the Russians are guided by. Well, you can recall any historical parallel, draw a comparison with any Russian century, and we understand perfectly well that this is exactly how Russians have always acted. Murders, murders, and more murders. I think that in this case, perhaps for the first time in the history of the Russian pseudo-empire, Russia has made a very deep mistake. And with its future collapse, which I hope for, it will regret having made such a huge geopolitical mistake, or rather, having committed a crime by attacking our country. But that's already, let's say, a topic for a separate conversation. So terror and more terror. And in fact, these are signals to Mr. Trump. I think he is immediately informed about what is happening. And when we comment with bitter or just plain irony on what was written by the so-called former president of the Russian Federation, he is commonly referred to as Alko Medved. We're talking about the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. So it's also perfectly clear that this isn't drunken rambling. It was very primitive. This is what Putin wants to say to the world. And Medvedev is simply voicing it. Simply.
Trump has finally made it clear, for the second time even, that we shouldn't think they don't understand, and we shouldn't just chalk it up to, frankly, Medvedev's alcoholism. We understand perfectly well that's the essence of your underhanded diplomacy. That's how important it is that Trump drew attention to, I don't even want to say the word.
It's not the first time he's paid attention to it. At least for the second time, he's drawn attention to this social opus, this informational opus on social media. People can have different opinions about President Trump. I myself am always very skeptical and critical of the President of the United States. But you know, it seems like it struck a nerve in any case, because the response turned out to be rather tough. I have no illusions about Mr. Trump, but nevertheless, if this turnaround, pardon the tautology, by Mr. Trump towards strengthening sanctions against the Russian Federation continues at this pace, then finally this will truly be the right thing to do. Perhaps some kind of enlightenment has finally come over the head of the White House. Sanctions today and armaments are the two tools that can bring the Russian Federation to its knees. Well, today that's obvious. And I really hope, I always remain an optimist anyway, I really hope that someday this will work. Until the 8th of August, well, I don't know, then I guess we'll really have to believe in miracles again, that miracles do happen in this universe.
There is also a third tool, you yourself just mentioned it. That is the removal of Putin, even physically. For us, any means are acceptable. Yes, let them consider that option as well. We hope that it's on the table too. Sergei, the collapse of the Russian Federation as a result of this unlawfully started war is inevitable, as you see it. How much closer are we to it today? We are seeing strikes on military-industrial complex facilities, on logistics targets. We are trying to disrupt the logistics chains of civil aviation, civilian railways, and not only those, but also other transport supplies. But is the result sufficient as of today? Because so far, this mostly resembles a strategy of small cuts. And do we have the strength to scale all of this up?
I share and fully understand, including the indignation of Ukrainian citizens when they say it's not enough. I myself allow myself to write on social media, it's not enough, we need more, there will be more to come, and so on and so forth. Again, it is necessary to understand what our obvious strategy is in this situation, and most importantly, what resources we have to strike targets on the territory of the Russian Federation. Not at residential buildings, no matter how much some might want that. Not at maternity hospitals, no matter how much some might want that. God forgive me. Sorry, our conversation is turning a bit philosophical, but still. So actually, I would like to take my hat off to the person or team who compiled the list of those enterprises in the Russian Federation where every night combat mosquitoes arrive. Every single enterprise, whichever way you look at it, you open it up and you will quickly realize that this particular enterprise is critically and fundamentally important for an entire significant sector of the Russian Federation's vast military-industrial complex, whether it's an integral part of the intricate chain working on the development and creation of powerful explosives or the comprehensive production of essential ammunition, and so on and so forth, covering a wide range of critical military supplies, or communications equipment, or its transport logistics, as we see, especially when it comes to railways. This is something sacred for Russia. They always rely on the railways. So, in fact, this list is really very well put together. It's competently compiled and it's strategically sound because it disrupts those very chains of the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex. Yes, I'll say it again, we want even more. Yes, we want them to cry too, to groan, to go through what Ukraine is experiencing every minute of this war. Again, we have to assess our own capabilities. But it's kind of like, announcing that tomorrow we're going to storm Perekop. I think we would probably be the first to go in this regard, because ahead lies the left bank of Kherson, our beloved, our native land. We understand perfectly well that this would not bring any results. Yes, probably it's slow. Yes, we want it to be faster. But again, we have to say that Ukrainian ballistic missiles will have to be involved in these matters. In these matters, a more mature Ukrainian military aviation will also have to be involved, and so on and so forth. So, of course, it all comes down to our resources and reserves. That's why the issue of help from our allies is obvious here. New weapons, new technologies. We can only guess, but I understand perfectly well that there are quite a lot of new military technologies in the world. And it's no coincidence that the president says to use the front line of the Russian-Ukrainian war as a testing ground for this new weaponry. Here it's a case of combining the useful with the pleasant. The main thing is to use it against the Russians.
Yes, absolutely. And we agree, yes, to help with its use. And here's the question I have for you. How quickly do you think the Russian army would collapse if, first of all, we had these tests of the latest weaponry, or at least if Trump went so far as to provide a larger arsenal of weapons and lifted the restrictions on flight range, payload, and the amount of explosives these missiles can carry? What am I getting at? For all 3.5 years of the full-scale invasion, we've basically been watching as the so-called great and mighty, at least as they promoted themselves, the world's second army is unable to cope with Ukraine, which, let's be honest, is fighting not with junk, but with outdated NATO weaponry. If it comes up against the latest NATO weaponry, what will be left of it?
I think that Russia should not only face new NATO weapons, but also have its rear set on fire. Hydroelectric power stations and substations will burn and explode, not just one or two at some key, even if important, railway station. The North Caucasus Railway will be ablaze. This is the front line. This is what comes from Rostov, Stavropol, Krasnodar, and also, for example, goes toward the Pokrovskoye direction. And these wagons with ammunition will not make it. When the Far East is ablaze, when the supply of North Korean weapons and ammunition is cut off there, and they don't reach the front, what will Russia be left with exactly on the line of combat? And essentially the rear. The rear must burn. No matter what anyone says, the mysterious Russian soul, which has always really appeared in the image of Raskolnikov, who kills an old woman with an axe, that's all it's capable of, including the Russian army, fighting old women. So when you punch him in the face, he starts to cry, he starts to look at the axe as a source of hope, because through that axe he can leave this life and no longer be afraid. So let's help the Russians do the same. Again, we're talking about resources. God willing, these resources will not only appear for us, they will appear, I'm sure of it, but that they will appear in the quantities and volumes we need today.
Well, let's hope that both the scale and the speed of production will be at a high level. For now, we're only getting announcements, right? For example, about our ballistic missiles. Just recently, the new Minister of Defense, Shmyhal, did this. Of course, we'd like to hear not just announcements, but also about what these ballistic missiles have actually accomplished deep inside Russian territory. Let's hope that happens very soon. It's about time. Serhiy, thank you so much for, despite serving in the armed forces of Ukraine and defending us and our lives, our deepest respect for that, you still find time to connect with us and share your analysis. That means a lot to us. Please take care of yourself. Serhiy Bratchuk, spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army, joined us today. Serhiy, until next time.
See you next time.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.